Welcome back, everyone, to the Thought Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Barr. Today is episode 18 of the Thought Leader Podcast. And on this podcast, we talk to past and current thought leaders in the realm of health, wealth, and relationships in hopes of reaching past, current, most importantly, come on, say it, put it in the comments, aspiring thought leaders. Those of you out there, you have a message in your heart, you have a mastery in your mind, you want to get it out to the world, but you're on the precipice. We want to talk to these people and understand their stories, understand the tough parts of their stories, understand their desire in hopes of not only inspiring you, but also potentially, motivating, educating, giving you what you need to take that first step outside of your comfort zone and get your message and mastery out to the world. I'm going to tell you today, I apologize. Today is the longest podcast. It's going to be about an hour, and it's because I nerded out. I absolutely loved our guest today. We spoke with Jonathon Stewart. We spoke in the realm of wealth. We spoke in the realm of Hollywood, screenwriting, screenplays, generative AI, which I challenged him a bit on. I love where he came from. I see both sides of the argument of where we're at right now. But let me tell you a little bit about Jonathon Stewart. He is a screenwriter best known for Pixar, Disney's Cars 3, Warner Brothers' Smallfoot, which I think is a very underrated animated movie if you haven't seen it yet, and Angry Birds 2. He has written screenplays for Dreamworks, Universal, Warner Brothers, Paramount, ABC Studios, STX, Paramount Animation, Sony Animation, Fox Animation, Netflix. Ever heard of it? Served as Pixar's Braintrust from 2013 to 2014. Stewart has produced and hosted over 500 industrial videos for the New York Times Company, Verizon, Walmart, PepsiCo, eBay, the Discovery Channel, others. He holds a BA in Developmental Psychology from Dartmouth College and has studied Generative Artificial Intelligence at MIT. His current venture, NarrativeDrive.org, aims to mentor new, diverse, and previously undiscovered voices in screenwriting. It was an awesome podcast, man. We talked about asking the big questions, challenging the status quo. Biggest thing that came from today is embracing fear, working through fear. What fear can show us about ourselves and how it can actually allow us to identify who we are and what we want and take a small step towards it. When it came to his craft, he talks about the importance of consistency, constantly working on your craft. He talks about getting into Hollywood, his big pitfalls, how long it took, 6 years to get his name out there, what he kept in front of him and why he kept it in front of him. He talks about generative AI. Like I say, I challenge him a little bit. He gave his answers to it. I'll let you learn more in today's podcast. But if you're still listening to me 3 minutes in, make sure you make sure you subscribe. We want to get these messages out to the world. And the way we do it is nothing to do with me. It's you guys. Yes, I'm just the fool in front that's willing to be uncomfortable and continue to put these out. But likes, comments, and subscribing is what helps us grow. And it's free to do. Crazy concept. So if you could, that would be awesome. Today's podcast, you know who it's brought to you by? It's brought to you by Thought Leader. 8 years, this company has made it a mission to help its coaching and consulting clients get their authentic message out to the world in hopes of reaching their own desired audience through the power of speaking and business building. Over 650 clients landing TEDx talks, hundreds speaking on virtual and physical stages around the world. Thought Leaders perfected the art of delivering a top-tier message. They also have other programs to build and scale your own high-ticket program and authentically market and sell it to your target audience in order to build a sustainably scaled business. Jonathon went through our TLA program to get a TEDx talk. He landed a TEDx talk, and it's probably already been filmed by the time of this coming out, and it's getting ready to go live. So feel free to look for him on YouTube and go watch that as well. We'll link it below if it's already come out. Feel free to watch that. We appreciate you, everything you're doing to support us. Really hope you enjoy this. Now, here is me and Jonathon, and watch me nerd out. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Thought Leader Podcast, episode 18. Can you believe it? I'm your host, Dylan. Today, we're talking to Jonathon Stewart. I'm going to say Jonathon this entire time. I'm going to hold myself to that. We're going to be talking in the realm of wealth. We're going to be talking Hollywood. We're going to be talking screenwriting. Maybe we're going to talk Smallfoot, one of my favorite WB movies, now that I know it's Warner Brothers. And we're going to be talking about a sensitive topic today for some reason, generative AI. So we're going to learn a bunch about you, your story, your beliefs, your message, your mastery. Jonathon Stewart, thank you so much and welcome.
Thanks, Dylan. Thank you for having me on. This is a real pleasure, man.
This is fun, man. Aspiring storyteller, someone that's been a screenwriter for a while, worked in Hollywood. I am going to do my best not to nerd out, but I also am very curious to ask some questions here. Let's start with the one everybody gets. If you've watched other one, you're one of our biggest fans too. Thank you so much. You know the first question, which is Thought Leader Podcast. Broad term. A lot of people have different meanings for it. So for you being on this podcast, what does being a thought leader mean to Jonathon Stewart?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, being a thought leader to me is about asking big questions. I think it's about challenging the status quo. I think it's about following your instincts and stepping out of your comfort zone. And I think that it's about exploring things that haven't necessarily, or that we're at the forefront of exploring, or that haven't been explored at all. But ultimately, I think it's about, on a personal level, it is embracing fear. It is about following sort of your calling. There's a lot in there, I guess.
Yeah, man, you're speaking my language when you say follow your calling and trusting your instincts, man. Before I get into your story, if you don't mind me asking a question there, what do you do? I know everybody's different, but what have you done throughout your career, man? Like you, Netflix, ABC Studios, Paramount, Dreamworks, Universal, like you've done a lot. What do you do to follow your instincts? Like, is there certain things, there's certain practices that you come back to?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and you kind of touch on a couple different things. But following your instincts, I think first of all, it's about being able to really trust your instincts, and I think that there's a real for me at least, there is a real important part of that practice, which is, I try to journal a little bit all the time. I try to, have moments of mindfulness. I try to really, meditate when I'm being good about it. But certainly like taking moments to visualize all these things, to kind of clear away the noise, because there's so much noise out in the world, especially today, that if you can easily get tricked into thinking some of that noise is part of your instinct. And I think that's where people get tripped up a lot. So if you can hear that sort of inner voice inside of you as clearly as possible, that's a good start. And then from there, it's really about just kind of following it and asking questions and not being afraid to move. Like I can't underscore for me how important it is to actually engage with the world, to actually do something, to actually talk to people or create something that didn't exist before, or somehow engage with the world in order to get things moving, because if you spend all the time in your journal and in your head, it doesn't have the same magical effect.
Yeah, it's because you've embraced fear big time. You've challenged the status quo big time. We're going to talk about that with the hot topic being AI. But I love what you're saying, because it's a different lens of looking at journaling or meditation or visualizing. It's kind of like a workout, but for our mind, right?
Yeah.
To like understand the noise, to quiet it, because the more we spend time with it, I think the more we're able to be like, that thought's not mine. That thought's not mine. Ooh, that thought, I like that. That is me. Right. And then we start to like strengthen this muscle of knowing who we are. But then you say it's like, then go play, get out in society, like intermingle with people, get conflicting opinions so you can further understand yourself. Love that.
For sure.
But you're a screenwriter, you're a storyteller, aspiring storyteller. I believe time powers stories, and I think stories power time. So I would love to know the origin story of Jonathon Stewart, right? Before Hollywood. What got you, if you can recall the moment, like what got you either into screenwriting or even fucking storytelling? Like what was it that got this bug going?
Yeah, for sure. I think the The thing where I would start is that I have always been a writer of some kind, like
Mhm.
as long as I can remember. It has always been a tool that I've had to be able to express what's inside of me, and obviously have spent decades developing that voice. But I would say I knew as early as probably high school that writing would have um, some sort of home in what I do. And in college, I obviously writing is a really big tool in college in terms of being able to communicate whatever it is that you're into, whatever field you're in. And I think I was there, I went through a number of different things I was interested in college. But it ultimately came back to I love movies. Movies have always been a language that speaks to me. It was a
Hmm.
big part of my childhood. It was a big lens, no pun intended, for understanding the world around me and how relationships work and how love works and how you can travel and see different parts of the world and different cultures all through this medium of movies. So that was an early love too that has permeated my life, I would say.
Hmm.
And so it was after college when all of my friends were going off to be investment bankers and consultants and working in advertising agencies and that sort of thing, where I had sort of a come to Jesus and was just like, that's not me. I
Mhm.
don't know what it is yet, but I know I love writing and I know I love movies. So let's move to LA and try to figure that nut out. So
Now,
that's what got me here.
were you doing before this, like in high school, in college, were you doing the practices of your mindset with journaling, with finding that inner voice? Because right there, I mean, it's easy. Like your friends are going to do the real world jobs. I'm going to go in sales. I'm going to go in business. I'm going to go do this. And you're like, I'm going to fucking risk it, guys. Like, was there that instinct that you trust? Did you build the muscle leading up to it, or was it something else?
It's a good question. I definitely journaled in high school and college for sure. It was way less of a practice, I think, and more of I just need some sort of dump to get all of this crazy energy out that's associated with that time in your life. So the journaling that I do now is much more centering. Mindfulness as a concept really wasn't as front and center back then as it was today, except in I guess certain circles. So yeah, I would say I was less centered in general at that time in college than I am today. I think that's common for anybody really, but
Mhm.
yeah, you point out though, that was a big first big leap for me, was just to say I'm gonna move out to LA because this was the internet was around. I'm not that
Mhm.
that old yet, but it was in its infancy. And so coming out to LA was, before there were all these social networks and any sort of thing like that. It was like you call the alumni office and see if there are any people whose phone numbers you could possibly get.
Mhm.
Maybe, you know what I mean? That was as good as networking got at that point. So
So it's like
so yeah.
the practice isn't fully there, but it's there enough for you to be like, "No, I know who I am and what I want," which again, I think I wanted to originally call this podcast "The Uncomfortable Thought Leader" because I think a lot of times people just see Jonathan Stewart's resume. Again, I'll go through it if we need to, but everything that you've done, and they're like, "Well, he can do it, I can." And we
Yeah.
don't realize these uncomfortable, like, chapters of our lives and what we decided to do in them, and I'm sure it was tough when you went out there at first.
Yeah,
But you
Dylan, I was just gonna say that's a really good. I would underscore that because I think that we all do that, especially in this, Instagram era where you can see everybody's bona fides like up front and center, and how realistic or not any of that stuff is. What you don't see is the struggle. What you don't see is the uncertainty. What you don't see is the fear or the self doubt or all the different forms that this kind of resistance takes in all of our lives. It's not unique to me or you. Like we all feel this. And I think that learning to confront that, however you do it and however you can manage it, is one of the real tricks in any form of success. It's stepping outside of your comfort zone is the first step of it.
do you know what you do to do it? Like, if you can kind of, like, now reflect, hindsight now, looking back of, "This has been something consistent I do to get out to challenge that or to get outside the comfort zone."
that I would say that's sort of the second component I would talk about, which is consistency.
Uh-huh.
Because there, just as a general rule, embracing the discomfort is a good thing to do. Also, just being consistent, or at least pursuing something over time, for over and over and over. People always talk about what's the secret to being successful in Hollywood, and one of the running jokes is it's persistence.
Mhm.
It's the guys and gals that have been out here as long as I have, that you either fail or quit or leave. The people that stick around are the ones that are still working.
Mhm.
So there really is something just to persistence as well that I think is a really important piece of the equation.
So if you're listening, everyone, cultivate it early, persistent. Seth Rogen talks about that in the interview
Yeah.
that he has. He's like, if you don't quit, you might make it. If you do
Yeah.
quit, you definitely won't. That's the only
Only
thing
way to make sure that you're not going to succeed is if you
yeah,
take yourself out of it. That's
I
100% right on.
okay, so you've done that, you've went through it, you've worked on a bunch of really big works. Can you tell us a bit of what a screenwriter does? It's because even for me, I love stories. I love the power of allegory. But when I think of screenwriter, I think it feels like such a big term. Where I'm like, what the hell do you do as a screenwriter?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you're asking it too. It's something I've actually kind of been thinking about a little bit with some work
Mhm,
that I've been doing recently. But um, the job of a screenwriter, I think let me start with saying that I think the misconception is that you come out to Hollywood and you write a script and then you sell it, and then all of a sudden, poof, you're a screenwriter and everything just rolls from there, and you
damn it.
just keep creating these movies, and it's so not like that.
Mhm,
And that's something I think a lot of people come to grips with, firsthand. And so that's what it's not, by and large. What it is screenwriters are the strangest position on a film crew, because we are the first people to take ideas that are sort of floating around in people's heads, whether it's our heads or the director's head or the producer's head or an actor's head, even in some cases. And we have to distill that down into the first level of something that you can pass around to other people, which is, a treatment or a script or just some sort of concrete representation of what these ideas are. And again, if we're talking about movies, the ultimate representation that we're shooting for is a piece of celluloid that goes on the silver screen that people sit in an audience and watch and have an emotional reaction to. So we're going through this iterative process of taking an idea and bringing it to that final piece of film that people can experience. And the screenwriter is at the very front end of that. So we're translators of a sort.
mhm,
We are certainly storytellers. Certainly, every good screenwriter that I know, their superpower is to be able to hear a bunch of things or see an idea and shape it into a story.
mhm.
And there are lots of techniques for that, obviously, that you learn. But that's the big thing.
And it also sounds like not only shaping it into a story that the audience can digest, but it's like if you're taking these ideas from the director, but you have so many people that are a part of this, you have to kind of shape it into this common thread that everyone can get a part of and understand. Now, do you do it mostly through a script? Do you do it through storyboard sometimes? Like what seems to work best?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it depends on the medium a little
Mhm,
bit. I work in live action and animation. Animation is a little more iterative. It has a few more steps in between. It's a slower process. There's obviously art involved. We create these. Um, we, along with all the artists, I don't mean to take credit for that,
mhm,
create these animatics that give you a rough draft version of the movie before it actually goes into any sort of real animation in terms of
mhm,
character design or set design or any of that sort of thing. So I guess I'll use animation as the example because it's a really good medium to be able to get in there and chew up the story a bunch and figure out sort of how that flow works. So in that sense, as a screenwriter, what we're doing, you said it earlier, and I just wanted to touch point on that, which is it is representing a lot of different people's interests,
mhm,
and being able to um, keep the thread of the whole thing. We're kind of the keepers of the like, okay, here's the whole story from beginning to end.
Mhm.
And, we'll have a storyboard artist who executes a little piece of that as sequence later in the movie. And we're like, oh, that's amazing and super entertaining on its own. But guess what? Like, he can't be doing that because it runs, against
Mhm.
what this character is doing earlier. It doesn't fit into the hero's journey of this
Mhm.
particular character, that sort of thing. So
So
I can
you're
get into the value of that as we get into the talk about artificial intelligence as well, where I see
Oh,
the
man, am
role.
I excited for that part. But you're the guardian of, it sounds like, you say the hero's journey or like the main plot points that are going to hold up this story, as well as the character development. So as people come with ideas, you're the person that's saying, great. Ooh, let's get creative and we can actually move it in here between plot point 2 and 3. Or you have to be the person that says, hey, great, here's why it doesn't work. Right. So you have this main thread of the plot and the story and the journey. And then you can use that to communicate with the team who also want it seems like a very collaborative process, but you get to run point when it comes to the base story.
For sure. And movie making, whether it's live action or animation, is a very, very collaborative endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
And so another analogy I like to use too is that we're sort of architects in the process. We're the ones who have the blueprints for how all this can function, and those blueprints either stand the test of time, or they get torn apart, or they go off in a different direction, or what have you. But that's sort of, that running point is a good way to envision it too.
It's got to be so tough, right? When you have that story and someone gives an idea. I think a lot of times too, it's like when we have that story, it's our baby, and that someone gives an idea, and you're like, "Well, that doesn't seem right." And you got to like breathe into it and be like, "Okay, what could we potentially find here?" Again, I'm gonna do my best not to nerd out. Tell me a little bit about getting into Hollywood, right? So, do you have some favorite stories? I'm curious, like, how did you get in? And I'm also curious, like, why animation? Because I also prefer, like, I was the guy taking my little sister to animated movies to be a good big brother. I wanted to fucking watch it, right? Like, how did you get in? Any great stories? Why animation?
Yeah, for sure. So, the thing I always lean on at first is to say, I can't tell you how to rob a bank,
Hmm.
but I can tell you how I tried to rob the bank
Okay.
in terms of breaking into Hollywood. So, uh, yeah, I mean, I think there were a bunch of questions in there, but the animation part of it kind of came secondarily. So I'll get to that in a second.
Hmm.
Although I've always been a fan of animation too. I think I watched Aladdin as a young man a thousand times.
Hmm.
And so when I first got to Hollywood, it was definitely just a process of trying to figure out how the business works, trying to figure out how movies are really made, and not really having an understanding of any of that. I think some of that information is a little more available and accessible now than it was then, but still, it wasn't until working on independent films that I started to see not only how the story comes together in a movie, but how the actual production of the thing that is a movie takes place. And I remember that being just sort of a watershed moment for me. Like, wow, this is like a little army, a little company that's built in order to create this thing, and everybody does their own part. And it's this pyramid of people that work together in order to create this thing. And so I had some real early experience in independent film, and at some point pretty early on, I started applying those principles to my own work and did some short films and music videos and that sort of thing. And at the same time was really trying to develop my craft as a screenwriter too. And that would be one of my main pieces of advice for any young writer out there, is to just hone your craft. Like, that's, along with the persistence and embracing the discomfort, practicing your craft is also essential. Like, you need to be as good as you possibly can be. You need to be excellent at what you do in
Hmm.
order for any of this to work. And that's just, again, it's the, call it the 10,000 hours thing, call it the, however you want to phrase that. But anyway, so I was working on my craft at the same time as working in independent film. And I had a good friend from college that pitched me a story one day that was actually a story about his great uncle who was a protege of Frank Lloyd Wright's. And he was like, I'm thinking about writing this into a movie. And I was like, that sounds great. There's a lot, you know, the story about legacy and family and this, you know, crazy old genius who was also, you know, had a real dark side too. And he said to me, he's like, okay, great. Well, do you want to write it with me? And I was like, yeah, sure. And that was sort of the birth of my creative partnership that has gone 17 years now with my writing partner. And so a lot of this, when I say we, I'm referring to he and I in this process. But so once that happened, then he and I kind of started working together on screenplays, and it started out with like, who's going to type, to, you know, developing this whole protocol of how we work back and forth in terms of breaking story, in terms of divvying up writing responsibilities, in terms of editing, in terms of making sure we have a unified voice across a whole piece of work. You know, our partnership also extends into taking meetings where we're pitching ideas, and one of us can be listening and one can be talking, and it's a real nice fluid thing. There's a lot of real great advantages to having a writing partner. But so we wrote a couple scripts. The Frank Lloyd Wright run turned out really well. We had some independent money behind it, and some Robert Redford was attached to it at one point to play Frank Lloyd Wright, and we thought we were on this magical track to get this movie made. And then the financial crisis of 2007, 2008 hit, and all that independent money that was, you know, going to finance films and art things, that fell apart. So we went back to the drawing board, and it was ultimately when we came up with this idea of telling the story of Dr. Seuss, who you know, has written all these books that we know and love. Many have been made into movies. We stopped and said, well, if this guy had even half an interesting life, like, wouldn't that make a really cool movie? And so we did some research, and it turns out he has like 10 lives. There's so much in his life and so many different angles that we were inspired to write this movie about him. And you know, that was a process in and of itself, but it ultimately ended up getting us a lot of attention in Hollywood, just because it was a script that people really resonated with. And although people in town were like, this is a really hard movie to get made for a lot of different reasons, it is something that everybody responded to. And so that opened the door for us to start meeting producers at production companies and executives at studios all over town. And that was our entree into Hollywood. And that was really, you know, after being in LA for over a decade, that was the first time that the curtains were sort of pulled back for us to really understand what a screenwriter's job is in Hollywood, that we were just sort of talking about. And so that was sort of our first step. And then the animation came, you know, we had this literally like over 100 meetings, and one of them was with the head of development for a big animation studio called Pixar. And we had this awesome meeting with her, and really clicked. And she said, okay, well, you know, the thing about working at Pixar is we hire 0 to 1 writers a year, and you have to come up to Emeryville to work here, and we don't have anything for you guys at all right now, but you know, we'll keep you in the Rolodex. And we're like, oh, all right, well, cool meeting. Cut to 6 months later, we got a call from her, and she said, hey, just so happens we have something that might be right up your alley. Would you take a look? And it was a draft of Cars 3, and it was broken for a whole lot of different reasons. And we had some, you know, pretty good ideas about how to go in and fix that. And we pitched it to them and got hired on the spot, and spent 14 months up at Pixar working on Cars 3 from thereafter. So that really was the spark that lit the fire of animation in our careers. Because once we came back to LA after that 14 months, all of a sudden it wasn't just like, hey, you guys have a great spec script and you're great writers. It was like, oh, wow, now you really understand the animation process as well. And, you know, I look at that time as like getting a PhD in screenwriting, and the animation process as a screenwriter is sort of, you know, invaluable.
This is gonna probably go on record for longest podcast because it's just so
I know. I
interesting, right?
apologize in
No,
advance.
no, no. It's like all of this gives me more I want to ask. Like that's it. It's
Sure.
on me. First question I have with all of that, because it's incredible, right? I'm taking all these notes. How long was this whole process? You say, is it Frank Lloyd Wright or Franklin Lloyd Wright?
Yeah, Frank Lloyd
Like
Wright, Frank.
for when there
Um,
to all the way to like how long was that process?
yeah, so our first so my writing partner and I came together in 2007. So that was when he made that pitch. Um, 2007, 2008 is sort of when the rise and fall of that script. And then 2010 or 11 was when we came up with the idea for the Dr. Seuss script. And
Mhm.
2012 was when it got all the attention that it got. And 2013 is when we started working at Pixar. So
Damn, so I
that
mean
whole
that's
span,
6 years.
was 7 years. Yeah, six,
6,
7
7 years.
years.
What if you don't mind me asking, because those are so you hit some if you think of, like, slap 1 in a movie where you just hit, like you're down to ground zero, and then you bring out your shovel and you dig 6 feet deep, and that's where you are. It's like, is the main character ever gonna get up again? You had a couple of those. Like, you the financial crisis happens and Frank Lloyd Wright movie can't go through. W Why do you keep doing it? Is the simple question. Like, why did you keep pushing forward there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that anybody who works in any creative industry that I'm aware of, not anybody, but as a general rule, it's difficult. Like our society is not set up around a great system for supporting the creative arts. It's just
Mhm,
not. There are obviously like amazing, great success stories, but for every success story, there are 100 or 1,000, failure stories. And I think it all comes back to what we were talking about before, which is it's just keeping a focus to say, okay, it's not even about the outcome of how things are going. It's about doing your job, and it's about keeping that front and centered and deriving value from that. If you are a person who really needs a whole lot of validation on a continual basis for what you do, like being a screenwriter is not the right calling. It
mhm.
is there's so much rejection, there's so many ups and downs, there's so many roller coasters of emotion that I think part of it over time it becomes a practice in and of itself to sort of weather those ups and downs, but they continue even to this day. It is a never ending circus for sure.
Well, the biggest thing that I'm hearing here is your value. End of the day, what's going to light you up and what's going to fill your cup through consistent practice and routine is bringing the value back to the craft, right? It's like as long as I continue to work, that's where I'm getting my value, not the validation, not when we have like the big highs or the big lows. It's the consistency that the through line is working on my craft, enjoying my craft, getting better at my craft. Because that's hundreds of meetings, like you said you had, which most of those probably go nowhere. That's pitching yourself to someone and they say, "Great, we only hire less than one person a year. We'll keep you in mind," and then leaving and being like, "All right, I guess we have to continue." Um, it's incredible. Again, that's what I want to know about the process. Is like, what is the uncomfort like? Um, okay, man.
No, that's all great and well encapsulated. And the irony about those comments from that awesome development head from Pixar is that those were honest and clear indications from her. The other crazy side about Hollywood is, of those 100 meetings we walked out of, a huge proportion of them were like, "We love you guys. We can't wait to work together. What's the next thing? When's it going to be?" And the first few of those feel very, very exciting. Like, oh, we're going to be like working
We made
everywhere.
it.
Yeah, we made it. And then you find out that actually like landing the next job, like getting paid to do this becomes a much trickier thing. And then getting paid to do this on a consistent basis that ultimately forms a career is yet another trick in that progression as well. But again, like you said, you hit it well. It really comes back um, to really being able to love what you do, to continue to work at it, to never give up.
Yeah, you said something of you're, constantly working on your craft, and I want to get to generative AI because that's one of the things we want to chat on. We did work at MIT to make sure we talk about this, but I want to ask the question: what do you do to like someone out there that could be a potential screenwriter, not pointing any fingers? What do you do to constantly work on your craft?
That's a good question. I mean, I think the easy part of that is you got to write. You got to be trying to figure out how to write a great scene.
Mhm.
It really does come down to the building blocks that create a story. It's about understanding the structure behind screenplays. I mean, reading as many screenplays as you can. There's a really good practice in that, which is getting a screenplay and a movie that's been produced from that screenplay and looking at them side by side, watching the movie and reading the screenplay and seeing how things translate from the page to the final product, seeing what changes were made during production to say, oh, wow, this was executed one way in the screenplay, but it didn't work for the director, or didn't make sense, or didn't make sense once you breathe life into it. So
Hmm.
that's a really invaluable practice. But just getting to understand the rhythm of how it all works, getting that in your bones, and it's like learning to play an instrument.
Yeah.
It is the same as all that. And then it's just about practice, because writing a scene is hard. It's very simple what you need to do, but it's very hard to do well, and it involves all sorts of things, not the least of which is two characters in dialogue talking about something that's not really the thing that they're talking about. The thing
Mhm.
that we love about good dialogue is that it's all in the subtext. So learning to do that effectively and believably, and at the same time conveying some sort of level of emotion or humor or pathos or whatever you're going for, only comes, I think, through a lot of practice.
And with it, like you're saying, it's writing just spending time writing good dialogue. It's spending time writing good scenes. It's spending time structuring that overall hero's journey or plot points. And then, like you said, even reading screenplays. So you're constantly coming back to the craft.
For sure. Yeah. Now, obviously, we do a fair amount of that just for work. But even when we're not, we're always generating new ideas and new stories, and that puts us right smack back in the middle of that process, which is to say, okay, here's a cool story, or here's a cool idea. Where is the heart of the story? Like, how does that story function? And depending on the idea, sometimes parts of that process are really easy, and other times you have to work really hard to figure it out, and other times you realize you've kind of walked into a minefield of a structural mess that you learn to anticipate a little better as you go. But every story is different, and every story has a lot of similarities, but every one is a brand new adventure.
I love this. And I'm curious too, because it's like you're putting the time in, you're putting blood, sweat, and tears, you're practicing your craft. Now I want to because the other part of you is now I want to get into the generative AI, right? You went to school, you're
Sure.
understanding it, you're bringing into it. So first, what got you interested in it? Like what got you interested in generative AI?
That's a great question. I would say the first thing that hit me about generative AI was not interest per se, but
Mhm.
more of a visceral, gut wrenching fear. The first time that I was introduced to a generative AI writing assistant by another friend of mine, it's like you type a couple words in, and bang, you have a big piece of prose that all of a sudden came from nowhere. That introduction to me was right about the same time that the first deployment of DALL-E came out as well. So people were saying, "Oh, look at this! You can create this piece of art from a few words." And
Mhm.
all of us, everyone I know, just looked at that stuff and was like, "Holy crap! That is crazy and scary."
Yes.
So I get that. Like, I fully live that, and to a degree I still do. Even when the Sora, OpenAI Sora demos came out a month ago or whatever, um, I mean, I still look at those and I can't quite wrap my head around the implications of what a tool like that, assuming that it functions the way that it appears to function, what that's going to do. And I'm not alone. You know, Tyler Perry halted the construction of an $800 million soundstage in Atlanta because of Sora, because of those demos that came out from Sora.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of fear about it still, but
Yeah.
that's where I started for sure. For
So,
sure.
okay, I love how this kind of comes back to your why, because it starts with fear, right? What you're talking about is embracing it. So it's like fear hits, we get tight, you take a breath through it. You've done this work, right? You step into it. You're seeing everything that goes on. I mean, you and I were talking about there is a lot of controversy. It's like there's part of me, if I were to play devil's advocate here, maybe, is I hear all the work that you've done, and I'm like, damn, you've like spent decades perfecting your craft. And there's a lot of people out there. You and I were talking before the podcast of illustrators that have spent decades perfecting their craft, and there's a bunch of controversy that comes up with AI, right? I think you're even boo leaders, people that go to South by Southwest to boo
Yeah.
people off stage.
Yeah.
Like, what are your thoughts on all the controversy around AI?
Yeah, I mean, let me backstep one tiny step before I answer that, just to
Okay,
say
please.
that, yeah, the thing that I did after I kind of picked up my jaw off the ground was to say, all right, I want to know how this thing works.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a part of me that wants to understand that sort of stuff. That's why my writing partner and I are very into structure for stories and that sort of thing. So yeah, so I dug in. I took some free classes. I took some stuff at MIT and Berkeley and some other, really like ground up, like how does generative artificial intelligence work? How does a transformer like ChatGPT work? How does it create this predictive language that feels like you're interacting with somebody almost human? And how do these image generators and video generators, how do they function? And all of that was a good baseline for me to say, okay, well, I'm understanding a little bit better now. The grand irony, I think, is that the people that have created these technologies still don't fully understand what's under the hood in terms of how these things have evolved. Like, there are these emerging case studies of what these tools can do that they weren't necessarily designed for.
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT in and of itself wasn't necessarily designed for what you can use it for today as well. So anyway, what I would say now is that as we're on this precipice with what I believe wholeheartedly is going to be a massive shift in not only my industry but in society at large.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we're on the precipice of a change that's at least as big as the advent of the internet, if not bigger. And so I want a front seat for that. I want to
Mm-hmm.
be able to and continue to do what I love doing, which is telling stories, which is creating things, which is finding things that are out there in the world to be discovered and bringing those to people to enjoy. So from where I sit, I look at these generative AI tools for what they are, which is tools. I as much as Google is a tool, or as much as Final Draft is a tool. These are things that in the best of circumstances, those of us with a mastery or an understanding of a craft should be able to take those tools and create even more amazing, beautiful, wonderful, things out in the world. And as far as the controversy between embracing it or not embracing it, I feel that too. And I get
Mm-hmm.
scared by that continually as well. But I guess I come back to what I believe is a fact, which is that it is going to change. Things are going to change. Things are already changing. And so again, I guess the best way I can put that is that I have, as a creator myself, I have the deepest of sympathies for this. But I also have gotten past that point of anger about it, I guess, most of the time,
Mm-hmm.
and have settled into a more proactive position, which is to say, what can I do as a creator to stay at the forefront of this massive change that we're undergoing?
Yeah. There's really two things that I get with all that, because one of them is going to be more of the bad news, and then one of them is the good news, right? Like the bad news is like what I'm hearing is it's here, right? Because I think a lot of times the challenges, and we talk Dolly and Mid Journey with like illustrators that are like you're taking my work, right? It's like scouring and
Yeah.
so you hear right, scouring and taking work that's out there without getting the credit, which can be super frustrating. I could imagine for an illustrator. Is that the first part of like
100%.
what to get past? Like, hey, that's it sucks, but it's here, or is there more that goes to that? And then I want to get
Yeah.
your
Yes, I think there's definitely more to that, and it's funny, the booing at South by Southwest that you referenced was specifically, I think, I mean, the biggest of the catcalls I saw in this video came when it was basically the AI company positing that idea, like it's here, you might as well deal with it, is
Mhm.
not a popular way to present this to anybody.
I'll
You
write
know,
that down.
like putting handcuffs on people and saying, "Well, you got handcuffs on, you might as well deal with it," is not the right approach.
Mhm.
And so, talking about, I just want to touch on what you said too, with regard to illustrators and having these tools scrape other of their work
Mhm.
to use in the creation of new things. That's a really big issue too, that goes beyond just the craft itself. It goes to copyright law,
Mhm.
which is, in my opinion, has been broken for a long while, at least since the advent of the internet, and has kind of been propped up with spit and glue over the past 20 years, and is about to just get ripped to shreds, if it's not already.
Mhm.
So I think there needs to be, and I'm a big advocate of this, I think there needs to be a really big push in terms of how artists will be credited for what their work is, and not just credited but also paid. And there's some different models that are speculative out there in terms of how that could work. But again, it's shifting into this whole new paradigm of things. Uh, and at the same time, I'll touch on this too, since we're here, is there are other ethical considerations when we're getting into generative AI, and I think those all need to be at the forefront as well. Um, and I think, but at the same time, I also think that it's this, in this emergence of these tools, it also is sort of democratizing the access to being able to create things to a wider audience. Again, as long as we are providing access to a wider spread of diverse people in the population worldwide to be able to access these things. So again, I think the road ahead is filled with pitfalls. It's filled
Mhm.
with landmines and all sorts of things that could really go awry. Um, and it's moving so fast. And again, that's by virtue of the competitive nature of capitalism, for better or for worse, and for worse a lot of times. These things are just moving so fast that it, I think the risk is that some of these things will fall to the wayside. But there are people who care a lot about it, and so I think that's important. That needs to continue to be alive and well, and
Mhm.
you know, will be
Yeah,
part of what we see.
it seems like these next, 5, 3, 5 years, like the immediate future is going to be so crucial for where this does go, right? But if it can be solved, if it can be figured out when you think of the copyrights and making sure people get credit for their work, what you're basically saying, now let's go glass half full, is there's a bunch of opportunity that could lie forward. So where do you now I appreciate you answering that, right? I wanted to take both
Yeah.
sides. Where do you see the potential benefits being for someone to find their passion, find like, how to become a better story writer or a screenwriter through generative AI?
That's a great question, and I would say I want to speak to two things here first, and the first one is sort of the foundation of it, which is to say, here's a bad use case of generative AI, which is to say, I have a term paper on this topic due. Let me type in what the prompt is, and let me type in 3 bullets, and then I want a paper, right?
Mhm.
That's a horrible use of the technology, and it's relying on the technology to create something out of nothing or from whatever sources it manages to call together, and generally results in a pretty bad result.
Mm-hmm.
My own experiences with ChatGPT and Claude and that sort of thing is they're not very good at complex issues. They're not very good at complex tasks. They can be very, very good and very efficient at very simple, well-articulated tasks. And so my own writing process, I do use it for that sort of thing in terms of saying, okay, I need a log line. And, you know, for any screenwriter, like creating a log line is just like pulling your hair out. It's a really hard process. And so, you know, I can interact with generative AI tools in getting, and I'll get there faster. And it's this. So this leads into my second point, which is to say the thing I think is most valuable about a ChatGPT or a Claude, or, you know, pick your AI poison, is that it is like a creative sounding board. It's like a mirror. It is like a really smart, worldly, occasionally eloquent, sometimes funny, but always non-judgmental partner that you can bounce ideas around with really fast. And so, rewinding what I was saying just before, this is where I think knowing your craft, whether it's screenwriting or fine art or music or composition or whatever it is, being able to, or just being a good writer, you know, learning all the basics in school and knowing how to determine what makes a good paragraph, what makes a compelling paragraph, how to understand what voice is good or what not. That is all imperative to carry into working with these tools, because if you don't have any of those things, you could look at a block of writing that comes out of ChatGPT and be like, "Wow, that sounds good to me," but it's often not. Neil Gaiman put it really well. He said that generative AI does not produce good information. It produces information-shaped sentences, which anybody who's used any of these tools, I think, can relate with. You know, you get a lot of repetition. You get a lot of really flowery language that sounds kind of good at first blush, but then when you're like, well, what does that actually mean? You get into it, and it doesn't really mean anything. The ability to discern that from truly good writing, in my case, is essential. And if I carry into the tool that understanding or that knowledge or that experience, then I am able to say, okay, well, this is a garbage piece of writing, but in here is a really interesting idea that I wouldn't have come up with had we not had this dialogue back and forth. So let's dial in on this idea, or let me go write off something by myself on this particular idea. And so I've found that it can be a really lightning fast way to get to really ultimately what's inside of me, not out there. And so that's just to bring this thing home, land this big fat plane that we're on, is to say, I think that that's where there's value for anyone. Right? Anybody who's trying to figure out, because, you know, bringing it back to the beginning of our conversation, which is to say, how can you be successful in what you do? You know, it's embracing fear, it's being consistent, it's knowing your craft, listening to your gut. But even just to say, like, well, what is my thing? I don't know what my thing is. You know, I've spent a lot of time there in my life saying, I like writing, but is that really my thing? Is that what I'm going to do? I feel like being able to ask those questions to a generative AI tool, in my own experience, even, it's able to bounce back and forth some ideas and say, like, wow, well, what about this? Or you could do this, or here are 8 different ways you could do this. And again, a lot of it turns out to be nonsense, but like number 7 out of those 8 things, you could be like, oh, wow, I never really thought about that. And maybe thinking about that leads me to the next step of my own journey. So my hope is that people are able to step outside of their comfort zone, embrace their fear, embrace the fear of these tools, get to understand how they work, play with them a little bit, and ultimately get to the heart of who they are in their own journey in a real meaningful way.
Yeah, because it just comes back to embracing. It comes back that you're constantly working on your craft and the consistency of it. Man, I really, really, really appreciate this. Last couple of questions. How are you with time, by the way?
I'm good. I can carry this on.
I've pushed back my meeting. There's just a couple final questions I want to ask.
Yeah, sure.
love this when it comes to it. You joined Thought Leader to get a message out there. You have done so much in your background, and it's just cool to see, right? We heard it in the intro. We're hear it again towards the end. Everything that you've done, both in screenwriting, then in Hollywood, and now in generative AI. Why did you join something like Thought Leader, and what is the main message you're looking to get out there?
That's it. Thank you for asking that. I would say that this is one of those things where I sort of stepped outside of my own comfort zone. I joined Thought Leader to prepare to give a TEDx talk.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of those things that, as soon as TED Talks became a thing back in the day, I remember thinking, wow, that would be really cool to do that someday. And then my immediate next thought at that moment back in time was, well, what the heck would I talk about?
Mm-hmm.
And so it came around to this moment in time last year where AI was just, as it is today, it's just continuing to roll out at the speed of light. And I've now been a working screenwriter, for a decade and a half, and I saw this sort of intersection of these two things, and I thought, oh, I might have something to say here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started off on that journey, and I actually have a TEDx talk scheduled for next month, April 26th, at UC Santa Barbara. And so now the challenge has been to say, okay, what is that message? Like you said, what am I trying to convey? And part of it is talking about screenwriting and story, and the value of story, and the value of understanding our own stories and getting those out in the world, because we all have one that is completely unique to us. And the value of embracing generative AI tools in order to help unearth that in ourselves. And that's the message that I'm hoping to get out there. And the challenge is that the technology continues to change so fast that I've had to really take a step up into this 30,000 feet up place to say, look, we are at this precipice of a new era of society, and regardless of how things change, they are changing. And the thing that won't change is being able to understand yourself and your own purpose and your own journey. Being able to convey that to the world is sort of the trick.
And I'm very with all of that. It's my final questions are always, you're getting outside your comfort zone to do this, and why did you decide to do that? I feel like I know the answer with the constantly embracing fear, right? That's what it means to you. I guess I will ask you though my second question, which is, why do you think, ego aside, why do you think most people don't get outside their comfort zone?
I mean, I think it's the natural response to fear. The natural response to fear when the bear comes running is to curl up in a ball and not have the bear maul you to death. So that resistance that presents itself anytime a new idea comes up, a new course of life, a new action, a new project, a new task that you set yourself to, it will always be there. And I think that it is easier to not step outside your comfort zone. But I think you do that, and I do that, and we all do that, at the cost of not discovering what's at the other side of embracing that fear, tackling that fear.
Really appreciate that. And last piece of advice for anybody on the precipice. You're going to say embrace fear, but that first step to embrace fear, what would you tell them?
I mean, I think I would say the upside of fear, and I'd say this about nervousness too, and about all sorts of these things that we perceive as negative emotions. The nice thing about them is that when they arise, we feel them. We know they're there, and so I think that's a signal that you need to pay attention and say, okay, whatever I was thinking that created that fear, that's important. That's an important thing. And I think, obviously whatever that first step is going to be, outside of identifying that fear, I guess that's the first step, is just whatever the smallest step you can possibly take in the direction of whatever that thing is what you should do. And it obviously is going to depend on what the thing is, but the smallest, tiniest step in that direction, as opposed to away from it, is the thing.
Jonathon, thank you so much, man. Holy shit. This is the longest podcast we have, and it is not your fault. It is on me of asking these questions and wanting to learn more. There has been so many takeaways. I'm going to recap some of the things that I've taken notes on, right? Being a thought leader, first and foremost, asking the big questions, challenging the status quo, embracing fear, right? Trusting our instincts and embracing fear, identifying what that could be, taking small steps towards it. Because it also it shows us something about ourselves. And then once we realize that, we can start to unearth what's important to us. We talked about the importance of consistency and constantly working on your craft, whatever that is, whether it's sports, medicine, screenwriting. We talked about the challenges and why we continue to push through them and where you get your value from. And we talk about how we can work with the ever-changing world when it scares the shit out of us, like generative AI, because the inputs and the value of the inputs is what's going to give us the best outputs for it. Also, if you're curious, Jonathon, Stewart, we're going to put it in the description below, narrativedrive.org, which aims to mentor new, diverse, and previously undiscovered voices in screenwriting. So make sure you check that out. I will definitely be clicking that. Such an awesome call. Thank you, anybody, for listening this long. Feel free to drop a like. Feel free to drop a comment. Biggest thing that you took away. Tell us that you like that it went long. Make fun of me. I don't give a shit. But we will see you all next week on the Thought Leader Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And Jonathon, thank you so much for sharing your mastery and your brilliance with us today.
Thank you, Dylan. I really appreciate being here.
Take care now.